Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. Today we have a footballer on the show. His name is Andy Riise. Andy played college football. He's a performance coach for the Chicago Bears. He's a keynote speaker. He's a leadership trainer. He's all about what's between the ears. He's retired military, West Point grad. He's got all these attributes. I wouldn't want to meet him in an alley. I'd kick my butt. Andy, welcome to Pro Mindset today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with you, and thanks for everybody who's joining.
Okay, Andy, everybody that listens to Pro Mindset, and we only talk about football 10% of the time, maybe at max. But it's like you being affiliated with an NFL team, everybody wants to know do you really see that the mindset is the difference between the ballers and the guys that are disappointments or busts? And if so, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm biased, right? Because that's what keeps me employed and gives me a job and in the best league, and at least in North America, one of the best in the world is. But yeah, absolutely. The mental game and mindset aspect of what players do is the differentiator. It's the X factor. It's the difference between the 1% who actually make the roster, make the 53 man, the difference between making the next contract, the difference between being able to get bigger, faster, stronger after an injury, getting a second, third contract, becoming a world-class player, Hall of Famer with a gold jacket. It is all those things. And I think what's interesting is that we're at in the NFL is that we are just starting to understand the full spectrum of what I call mental fitness looks like, which I can get into, but right now I think, like a lot of our society, when we think of anything mental, it comes from, dealing with psychopathology, mental illness and injury, identifying and treating, illness, things like anxiety and depression, which is a huge deal. I mean, that's the foundation of all things, the mental game, and then just the physical side, your best abilities, your availability. But in and of itself, the medical model is limited. It's just focused on solving problems. It's very reactive in nature. But we had to get that straight in the NFL. So about 5 years ago, the league mandated having in-house therapists, or essentially clinical providers. At the very minimum, they had to be contracted and be in the building somewhere between 3 to 6 hours. There's only about 6 teams that actually have full-time team clinicians like the Bears that we have. We're one of the very few clubs that has that. So we're really been slowly laying this foundation of mental health. But in baseball, for example, where I cut my teeth after my time in the military, we realize there's other 2/3 of this mental fitness bridge, right? So we think of, okay, well, now I'm available, I'm in the game. Now, hey, I have to be able to deal with all the challenge, change, and adversity of competing at the highest level against other grown men who are also the best at what they do and do this for a living. And so we think of like, okay, well, there's the athletic trainer for the brain, right? So we think of resilience and think of grit and those aspects that go into that. But that's right. But being inherently resilient, and playing psychological defense, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, although, their championship teams are built on defense, just like for high performing individuals are. The playing psychological defense doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be high performing. You have to put points on the board. So that's where I come into play, where I'm like the strength and conditioning coach for the mind, right? So if I want to get bigger, faster, stronger, and at the same time prevent myself from making myself hard to be injured, and being able to bounce back faster, I got to be able to go after the mental aspect of performance. I got to be confident despite setbacks, composed under extreme circumstances. I got to have that next play mindset. I got to be able to deal with stress and challenges and all the distractions that are on and off the field. And I got to be committed towards my goals and the team winning a championship. And so, those 4 C's of mental toughness, which mental toughness is psychological defense plus psychological offense, meaning performance. There's a training protocol that has been around for, around 150 years that is just now starting to kind of like really usher in this revolution, I think, in the NFL. And I feel honored and obligated to be kind of at the tip of that spear. It's kind of been my MO my entire career, both in the military. My history is the history of health and human performance in the modern military. I was at, kind of on the second wave in Major League Baseball, and I'm honored to be in this first wave of practitioners who do what I do, who are non-clinical providers who complement the clinicians and really provide that full spectrum of care to help meet players where they're at, get them where they need to go, not just to be better performing on the field, but also to be better human beings off the field. I think that's why another reason why the mental game is so important to the development of players and also coaches as human beings, right? Because there's, you play football. The great thing about this sport is it teaches you so many things. And I think the things that really stay with you are the intangible aspects of what you gain, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. Like, you don't necessarily remember all the great games, but you remember grinding with your teammates. You remember the relationships that you have long after you take your pads off. And, that's the things that really stay with you. The physical aspects, yeah, okay, I want to stay healthy, so forth, right? But this game is going to beat you down. You're going to remember a lot of injuries. I'm living proof of that as we speak right now. But those things that you learn that when you eventually transition in this short period of time in your life, that's going to make you a better human being. And that's really what drives me. I don't want to win just like anybody else. I'm a competitor. I love ball. Faith, family, and football is ingrained in who I am. But for me, when I talk to my players, it's like, I want to make you a better human being because you're a Chicago Bear, right? Because you're an NFL football player. And so I think that's why the mental game is so important, not currently fully utilized because it's not fully understood, but it's possible to train our brain like our body and craft. And we know more about our brain now in the last 20 years than the last 200. So it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. So you said a lot there, Andy. I'm going to dive in here and say that NFL players are just like us. They just do their work on TV. They have cameras and media people that ask them after their day at work how to go. And, why did this work and why didn't this work and why didn't you show up a certain way? And their salaries are publicized. And their movement from company to company and team to team is publicized. But honestly, we're all doing the same thing. We just don't get the publicity.
Sure.
So when you meet these guys where they're at,
yeah,
what is the most common mental defect, the most common mental challenge that you're seeing that weaves through maybe the guy that's killing it, but he's still struggling with this,
right?
The 53rd guy on the roster that's just trying to hold on so he can get another 53, active paycheck. What's that common theme for all of them? Because whatever that is, we've got it too.
Right. Yeah, I think the relationship with pressure and stress and pressure is one of the common themes because they are different. Okay. The player, you don't even know who he is. He's on his third team. He's invited to camp and he's trying to make the 53-man roster. And he's kind of got this anxiety built up about hey, I'm not getting as many reps. I have a very, very small window to make this work. This may be my last ride. Like, that mindset versus the veteran who's the $100 million guy on his third year, on his second contract. He's already made generational wealth. There's a lot of expectations on him, but maybe in a different way, right? And so, to break that down, like that veteran player, one of the common things that I see is that we automatically expect them to be leaders and they have no idea what leadership looks like, really effective leadership looks like in the locker room because they've never been trained and educated on how to do that. And they have a lot of misperceptions about what leadership is and what it isn't. And they have no idea how to develop all the skills to really become influential leaders in the locker room. And I saw it play out in real time last year, right? And so they're expected to be leaders because they're one of the highest paid people on the roster. But the other thing is they may not want to be a leader, right? But the pressure is still on them to produce and to perform and have this extra duty, so to speak, as being a leader, right? So, but there's still the pressure and stress related to those expectations, right? The expectations of the guy who's barely holding on to, his football dreams and his football life, the pressure and stress related to those expectations are a little bit different, but they're still very much the same, right? Because he's expecting himself to be perfect every single rep and opportunity that he gets, because he knows, he's only going to get so many. He's on a really, really limited stop count. So I can make the most of every single opportunity that I get. And the Super Bowl is my preseason game, right? And now all of a sudden I have less preseason games, right? So I think dealing with pressure, /stress, and expectations are very, very common up and down the roster, whether you're a really savvy vet who's trying to extend his career versus, a guy who's a second, third year guy who's holding on to his football life and dreams.
Okay, so you did a great job of articulating those situations because that is exactly the truth in the NFL.
Yeah.
You've got those, alpha males that don't know how to lead, but everybody's looking to them to lead.
Right.
And it's more about the position they play and the money they make than the character that they possess.
Right.
That they get picked to be the leaders in the locker room, so to speak. And there is pressure in the NFL, whether you're in a preseason game, whether you're in practice, whether you're, in the fourth quarter, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Different players are magnified different times.
Right.
Pressure to make the 53-man roster that week leading up to final cuts. Pressure is not so heavy on a guy that's got a guaranteed contract and he's been the starter for the last handful of years. There's no question about the fact he's going to make the team. He's got different pressure, but he's still got pressure.
He does. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what is the default response that how do most athletes respond when they're under pressure?
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
And how should they respond that would work?
No, it's a great question. And I think it really kind of gets on some fundamental things that I call the thought, performance, or relationship, right? Or the layperson call the mind-body connection, but they're like these brain patterns, right? And we have these, we have these billions of neurons in our brain, and, when they fire together, they wire together, right? And so the good news, cyclical neuroplasticity means that we can train and our brain can change itself over the course of our lifetime, right? But like based on how our relationship with stress and pressure, we develop these brain patterns, right? Even at 20, 25 years old, right? And so that determines like our response to these situations. And so I think, but that also understands like, so how I think in any situation, right? Drop me in, it's the trailer of a movie, like, whatever that is, right? Okay. So it's, I only have one series left on my final game of my preseason to be able to make the roster before final cuts, right? And so we're down by 3. I got to make a play. I'm a defensive edge rusher. I got to be able to make a play, right? And I haven't really done anything to show tape all night. In that type of situation, that guy is, and oftentimes like in that situation, he's going to start, his mind is going to start racing. It means he's going to have a more active brain. He's going to have a lot of chatter, in terms of what is he saying to himself, right? And that's that inner playlist that is that default playlist playing. And that can be helpful and hurtful, right? Most human beings, not just NFL players, have a default mindset that tends to be negative, right? Some research shows that up to 80% of the 6,000 thoughts we have a day are negative. Well, think about how important that is, that self-talk is in terms of how we think, because how we think impacts how we feel. What's going on with our physiology, what's going on with us emotionally. So how we feel. So there's a physiological response to where that's happening. It's like, okay, I'm getting ready to go in, I'm feeling butterflies. I got cotton mouth. I got that. There's a fight, flight, or freeze response is what you think about, right? And that is your body is channeling energy to be able to get directed to go do something really important. And so your interpretation of what your nerves are matters, right? And then what is the emotional response to that too? Am I excited? Am I, or am I scared? Am I operating off of fear or am I operating off of fuel? And then that then leads to the next loop, which is the response, the behavior, right? Which is, okay, what do I do or not do, right? So go back to the negative thought, like, oh crap, man, like I gotta make a play. I gotta make a play, right? I gotta be perfect, right? And I just keep playing that over my head over. Now I have a tight body, right? Because active mind equals tight body physiologically, right? So but your body is designed when it's at its best to have a very quiet mind, to have a loose body, not loose like as in all like loosey-goosey, but think of it like an apex predator. An apex predator, when it's about, you see a big cat, it's getting ready to go pounce. It's like, hey, it's primed and it's ready to go, but it's like a spring that's loaded, right? And it's ready to go. It's ready to fire. But when it's all wound up and too tight, the response time is going to be slower. And then the fear thing is going to accelerate that. So now I'm moving slower. I'm not responding as quickly as I can be. And I'm also operating off of, this default mode network, which then becomes, prevents me from making really good decisions. So now I make mental errors, right? I'm not playing free and I'm not trusting my skill set and all that I brought in up to this point during practice. And so I underperform. And then the loop now spins. You see what I'm saying? So that is a very common cycle that happens for players who, what I call a scarcity mindset, right? They're operating off of fear and thinking more and trying harder and doing more, which is the opposite of how you're designed to perform, which is to have a quiet mind, to feel confident, to feel collected, to be loose but ready, and then allow your body to do what it's supposed to be doing in the moment, one play at a time, regardless of what the result is, right? And so very inexperienced players, now some players figure that out through trial and error, but what I've noticed is that default mode network is what I call that common counterproductive pattern. It's a doom loop. It's very common amongst players who, it's a differentiator between those who have figured out on their own, or just have the talent to just really overcome any type of situation. But the guys who have above average talent, but then are able to leverage that mindset piece, now are able to get over the hump. And so now, instead of operating off of the default mode network that is counterproductive, they're able to be more productive in this situation. So regardless of the result, I've got a process where it's like, okay, how do I so I control my A and B buttons? How do I think? How do I respond? Okay, so in this situation, right, I'm going to be able to just think about one thing in the moment. Okay, I'm going to be cool, calm, and collected. I'm just going to fire off the ball, let my thing do. And then the results be damned. Whatever happens, it happens. But I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to move on to the next play, and the next play, and the next play. And so I'm living the game 30 seconds at a time. And I think the people who are really elite are able to do that and have optimal performances. So even when they don't have their A game, they have their C game, because inevitably you're going to be injured. You can just C plus because you're able to optimize a more productive default mode network.
Andy, one of the things that I've learned along that same line is the concept that we all have a story, and our story shows up, in this particular case, on the field, in the locker room, at the biggest moments. And we're talking about those big moments for those players that need to perform, because if they want to make the team, they got to show out. And their brain is telling them and reminding them, and the coach says, hey, this is your up, pats them on the ass on the way in and says, hey, bro, this is your shot. Make it count.
Right.
And all of a sudden, now there's a little bit more pressure.
Right.
And then they get in the huddle, and then somebody says, hey, bro, hey, Rook, let's say it's a young player. Hey, man, it's your time.
Yeah.
So the play's called. Let's say he's on offense. He goes up to the line of scrimmage. Now he's like, he's literally got like 30 pounds of weight on him, because he's feeling the pressure of the comments that he allowed to penetrate into his mind, to feed his inner voice, to basically say, hey, I thought it was important. I knew it was important, but now I know it's really important.
Yeah. Right.
So I've created a concept called performance bubble that I ask my clients to step into, so that they can control what's in it and what's not in it. And everything that serves you doesn't get to come in.
Love that.
And everything that doesn't, or that does, gets to come in. So the result of it is freedom, peace,
right,
confidence, belief, flow. Because your distractions, expectations, your previous disappointments, what happened the last time? Say you're a young player that is on your second team, and the last time you were in this mode, you were so excited, you jumped off sides. You roughed the passer. If you're a defensive end, you played out of control. And so, I love that, because like, if you really do look at an apex predator, you're talking about the Tom Brady's of the world. You're talking to those guys that are just amazing, and the biggest moments.
Yeah.
Because they play cool.
Yeah.
Watching March Madness is the same thing.
Right.
Not everybody wants the ball.
That's right. Yeah.
And this will be released here after probably the Final Four. But during the tournament, Maryland was down against Colorado State, and the coach asked his team, who wants the ball? Seconds to go. And the freshman said, I want it. And he made it.
Ain't that amazing? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So it's like, here's the question I have for you. I'm big about story, and story is synonymous with identity. And you showed up today with everything that you decided to bring with you. Okay. Positive and negative, good experiences, good you're a podcaster, good interviews you've had, bad interviews, you all bring it with you. Okay.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Can we be in this moment right now with you and me on Pro Mindset talking about mental training and leadership, and not be bringing what what happened the last time, or, another time when you talked to a guy that looked like me.
Right. Yeah.
Athletes bring baggage with them all the time.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, like, can we still be in the moment, but still have a history, right? Still have, I'm in chapter 4, but I have chapter 1 through 3, prologue and everything else that's written ahead of time. Percent. Absolutely. And I think the great thing about, I love the story aspect too, just because, as obviously how humans, we've evolved to be storytellers. It's the inner narrative that we tell ourselves. And I always say that what's great is that when it comes to our inner story, we're the authors, we're the producers, we're publishers, and we're the consumers of our own story. And we're constantly editing and refining what that story looks like, right? But the story is written in the moment, right? And that's the thing, what's interesting. It's just part of what we don't see in the process of, and having helped contribute and edit books. It's like what you're seeing is an artifact of what was actually written in the moment, and so, and when it's a work of art and it's beautiful and it translates to different languages and cultures and so many things nowadays, that regardless of like what the metrics are, the vanity things, that it's a bestseller on Amazon and New York Times, and you're an author, so you understand this too. But I think, yeah, that's what's been written in the past is in the past, right? But what you can, you don't control that anymore, right? But like you said, what you can control, I call them grip versus gravity forces. The gravity forces are what's happened in the past, right? But the grip forces, you're writing the narrative right now in the moment. That's all you can control, and maybe you think that you're writing, we tend to have this illusion that we're writing the future, right? But we control so few variables in terms of what determines our fate and what happens to us in the future. And I think that's a whole nother conversation. But I think when we come back, when it comes to performance, we're not always performing, and in a true sense of it. It's like when I talk about it, I break it down with football players. There's 4 phases of your performance cycle, right? And you can break that down in performance. There's planning, there's preparing, and then there's performing, and then there's processing, right? And that's a loop that happens, right? And so you're constantly, your mindset that you have within each of those phases is a little bit different. The mental skills that you use in each of those 4 phases during the season or the off season is a little bit different, right? But when you're performing, and you can only be right there where your feet are in that exact moment, playing from snap to snap. And then you have to have a process that helps getting you to perform, because it's not going to happen automatically, right? So everything you do in all 4 of those other 3 phases are getting you ready to let all of your skill out in that moment, right? And so I think that if you understand that, and you have a system and a process, it doesn't matter what the previous chapters are, because they're all informing what the current moment is that you're writing. And then that helps influence what the next chapters are of your story.
Well, something I think that's very critical, especially in football, a guy, Peyton Manning, one time threw 3 interceptions on Monday Night Football in the first half. And he came back and they won the game, and they won the Super Bowl that year. Yeah. But most quarterbacks can't recover from 3 interceptions in one half.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so we're talking the same language. You just have a little bit different nomenclature. I have 5 P's. It's your preparation, it's your practice, it's your pit crew, it's your preview, which is your visualization, and then it's your process. Nice. And it's like, it's that loop too. And so it's like, we're all talking the same thing. I think the thing that everybody in our audience can identify with, is a concept of that negative biased story we tell ourselves,
right,
when we have the biggest opportunities. If you're a salesperson, or if you're like courting some person, dating, and you're like, you have that, like, almost like that big moment where it could go either way.
Yeah.
She could say yes, she could say no. You could make the play or not make the play. And your life it's almost like the continental divide. A raindrop on one side they could be an inch apart, end up in different oceans. So it's like, I see that a lot in the NFL, where one play, one game,
right,
gets them over the hump, or changes their career to the negative.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's very true. The ripple effect. Right. And I think in the moment, thinking about that magnitude is probably not helpful, right? To put it in the context, right? You're just trying to be the best raindrop you can be and dominate that moment. And then what you're doing is you're tipping the odds in your favor, right? Is what I talk about. And I think anybody who gives guarantees to anything, especially when it comes to behavioral sciences, probably doesn't need to be, trusted too far. But it's all about tipping the probabilities. I mean, it's a math equation, right? Are you stacking the odds in your favor that's going to lead to optimal outcomes? Because you've seen also in other situations where, you could be, has done everything you could do in that process to be able to get ready to perform, and it just doesn't work out. It just does not work out at all. I think the Buffalo Bills in the 1990s, it's like, what else could they have done to become a Super Bowl champion in that era of greatness? And they just didn't get it done. And it could just drive you mad. You can live your life driving you mad.
Interrupt you. You have a relationship with the Chicago Bears. But here's the thing. If you are working with the Buffalo Bills right now, that would be the most fun challenge.
Oh, for sure.
Because they have so much talent. They got one of the best quarterbacks on the planet.
Yeah, for sure.
They have an excellent coach.
Yeah.
GM, the whole 9 yards is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Where would you start as a consultant and help an organization like that for whatever reason, the Kansas City Chiefs are their kryptonite?
Yeah, they are. It's, and this kind of goes back to institutional brain patterns that have to do with losing versus winning, and you see the opposite side, like the dynasties, pick any dynasty that's won consistently. It's the Chiefs right now, and so how do you develop this deeply ingrained belief that no matter how bad it gets, that we're going to get it done, even when we don't get it done, And so the only time the Chiefs didn't get it done this last year was in the Super Bowl, right? But now watch out, because that's gonna fuel them, in a way. So now they have a chip on their shoulder, right? And so now they've gone from, they love going from being the hunted to the hunter. Like, do not get 15 a reason, in 87, and Chris Joe, do not give that core group of leaders another reason with Andy Reise to give them an excuse to come back, because they're coming for you now. Now they got fuel. The failures turn into fuel. It'd be really interesting too, because I love how you I went back to the 90s and how you kind of translated to how that reflects the organizational mindset in terms of where they're at now too. Yeah, that would be a really interesting one too. Like, I have in my military career, I've been able to do some, part of what you do as an officer, you do investigations sometimes that happen, instances that have happened, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. Usually things that are bad have happened. I had this tendency to kind of do this really deep analysis on these things, like trying to figure out why things happen. One of them, I had a soldier who committed suicide at one point in time. I was in another unit where it was this really complicated accident with military mountaineering in Rocky Mountain National Park. And so I think about, like, hey, I would go about it the same way. I would do like this, like kind of like almost a psychological forensic analysis of that. And like, man, I don't know, Marv Levy's still alive, but he'd like the first guy I talked to. I want to talk to Marv Levy. What a genius. Is Marv Levy still alive? Is he dead now? I think he passed it. Oh man, I wish. But I would, Jim Kelly, like he'd be one of the first guys that I would talk to, those guys who are, Andre Reed, all those dudes, like, they kind of like go back to the history of that organization. Yeah, because I mean, we forget O.J. Simpson was a part of that history too. I mean, that's like nobody talks about that, right? So right. I would go way back and do some forensic analysis on this thing. Like, what are connecting the dots between attitudes and behaviors as they won, and then it crescendoed. It hit there's this glass ceiling. So the root cause analysis is figuring out what is it about this self-imposed glass ceiling they put in, right? That they put upon themselves that turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because arguably, I mean, you could go back. You remember the Super Bowl years in the 90s, like they kind of went either way. So like, yeah. I think the tipping point was Chris Norwood, frankly. I think that game, remember that one? I think that became their bucket move. Yeah. And then you see that happen. Go back to the Red Sox before they won in 2004. Go back to the Cubs before they won in 2017. These self-imposed limitations and governors last season that organizations put on them are, they're identifiable, I think. And
I
I think
agree.
like it sounds like, it sounds like kind of witchcraft. We got to like exercise these demons. No, it's not. You have to understand like what are the mindsets and brain patterns that have been adopted over generations that have carried on, that have limited them, but at the same time have also helped them. And so, and how do you overcome, how do you shatter that self-imposed glass ceiling? So yeah, I would kind of do, to answer your question, I would do like a really deep dive forensic look at it, right? Because I think anybody who looks at this time and place and ignores their history is a fool. I really do. I really do. Like, you can't ignore history. And I learned that from my experience in the military. The Army is 250 years old. 250 years old. I was lucky enough to serve in the longest continually active artillery unit in the Army that was commanded by Alexander Hamilton. I was in the same Army unit as Alexander Hamilton, as an officer, Army officer, and artillery officer. Think about that for a second.
That's crazy.
And the NFL, there's so few franchises that have an institutional history, and they ignore, there's such a turnover of people that we don't take the time to know our history. And I think if we take the time to know our history and all the traumas and all the strengths, now we can really start to really do it, some of that deep-rooted foundational culture building, right? Anyways, you can't, it's something I'm really interested in, but it'd be fascinating to take a look at that. And I just think it's really cool from a longitudinal perspective.
Well, Andy, it's no secret. Everybody knows there's generational curses in our families.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's in our DNA. And it's not a shock when your son starts doing some of the same stupid stuff you did or your dad did or that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it also is no surprise when you see, let's say, for example, the great-great-grandfather was a doc, and then the grandfather was a doc, and it just seems like they just know they're going to be a doctor.
Right.
Okay. If they want to be, they don't have to be, but they if they want to.
Yeah.
They know it's possible.
Right.
It's been done by somebody that they're related to. And now let's take organizations, the Yankees, the Dodgers, they just win. Okay. The Patriots, they will come back to win. They just will.
Sure.
So the question I have is, how can you instill in the athletes and in the players the idea that they don't have to adopt and absorb the organizational trauma that they have?
Right.
So when the Buffalo Bills draft their draft class this year and they sign some free agents, can they come in there with the attitude and the mindset and the identity that we're part of the new Buffalo Bills?
Yeah. You can. And I think that's why I'm so excited about Ben Johnson and what I saw with the Lions, because last year, for me, the aha moment that this is not the same old Lions, the brand new Lions, Pat McAfee says, is when they played Houston and they had an abysmal first half and they came back and found a way to win that game, I was like, okay, this is a different cat. And Ben knows what that requires. Yeah. So I think there should be an alignment between organizational and individual values, right? I think that, and I think the Army really speaks to this as an institution, right? I mean, it's an imperfect institution, right? But our win-loss record is in our favor. Okay. We'll say that. Right. And so with that being said, I think what really hit home to me when I was in the Army, I was a basic training commander along the way. And I remember in 2000, we adopted the Army values, which is based on the acronym leadership, loyalty, duty, respect, civil service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. I could just rattle them off right now. So the fact that I could rattle off Army values says something in itself. But I was we're given a card, laminated card in PT after a physical training formation, and we're given this extra thing to put on our dog tag. I'm like, okay, memorize this. All soldiers need to know this now. I'm like, what the hell is this crap, right? But a lot of times that's what organizations are doing. They're showing up, they got a new regime, and they got a fancy acronym, and like, oh, leadership acronym, boom, I'm going to throw it on the wall, we're going to walk away from it. That is not inculcating and establishing a culture of the cultural values that is a foundation of individuals and high-performing organizations, right? That paradigm shifted for me when I saw civilians move into individual civilians, who come from varying backgrounds, as diverse as can be, just like you see in an NFL roster, not nearly as physically talented in any stretch of the imagination, but just as diverse, right? And so it wasn't a melting pot. It was more of a mosaic aspect. And I'll explain what I mean by that is, so those individuals were then, through the course of basic training, taught about the Army values and why they're important, and then taught the behaviors and attitudes and their training as they learn to shoot, move, communicate, do all these things over the course of their 9 weeks. Everything they did was incorporating and weaving in these values, these leadership values, right? And being a part of something bigger than yourself and your mission. And it wasn't getting rid of your individual identity and saying, well, screw this, kind of like immigrants did. Okay, well, what's Spanish, Italian American, a Norwegian, Norwegian American, as I said. My great-grandfather had a brother who chased Andy Riise because he wanted to fit in and make it sound more American. There's a million examples of that, right? That's the melting pot effect. We're not asking you to do that to build culture. What we're asking you is, what is important to you, and how does that relate to the organization that you're now a part of? How are they aligned? Let's connect the dots here. Organizations have to take the time to actually know players at the individual level in terms of what is important to them. What is their story? And how does that relate to our story as an organization? And who has a better damn story than the Chicago Bears? I mean, I'm asking. No one does. Are we using it to our competitive advantage? I don't know. I'm being honest. I'm being honest with you right now, too. But like now, and if you have a story, a short story, a long story, it doesn't matter. It's still now part of the same story. I'm connecting the dots. And now all of a sudden, everything we're doing on and off the field is related to those values in action. Those values in action, they become our belief system. Those values become our lens in which we see ourselves and other people. So those values become beliefs in which lens in which we see this, so which then drive our purpose and our mission, right? And everything that we do is now like, Mao Zedong or charm school or whatever it is. It's inculcated because it's like water over a rock. It's not just some platitude or bullcrap up on the wall. It's trained. It's educated. It's lived. It's enforced. And that's how you do it. That's how you do it, And I think what I've seen so far is that there's so few teams that have figured that out, and they're waiting for some sort of magic to happen. Like it's a voodoo thing, like, instead of being deliberate and intentional about what that process is. But the organizations who have figured it out are the flagship franchises in our league who have won 5+ Super Bowls. I mean, and they should be case studies for everyone else. But the problem challenge is the evolution of things too, because the Patriot way, I will argue, does not work in today's modern football. From understanding Generation Z and player profiles and what's important to them, whereas the Patriots were trying to do the melting pot, what works is the mosaic, And so I think that's why I think ultimately Belichick's style did not stick without Brady, my opinion.
And I think it was tough on Brady a lot of the times, but he bit his tongue and kept on going because of the legacy he was building. Here's something that I'm seeing. I'm seeing based on what you were saying there in my 30 years in the NFL, is that some teams are playing an outside game and some teams are playing an inside game. Yeah. And I'm going to make this very simple. Yeah. An inside game is we want our organizational philosophy and our players to be aligned. Yeah. And everybody says that.
Right.
There isn't an organization in the league that doesn't try to do that.
Right.
And then the outside game is what they end up doing, which is, hey, we need our players to do X, Y, and Z. We need our players to step up. We need our players to be on the same page. We need our players to play their best. We need our players to sacrifice more. Whatever it is, we need them.
Yeah.
Well, them is you.
Right.
And so when you look at like the pillars of a franchise, talent's certainly number one.
Yeah.
You've got to be great evaluators and sign the right guys.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to have good coaches and leaders and a great scheme. Get all that.
Yeah.
You have to have, a sports performance guy that gets these guys physically ready, but these guys pros are doing most of their stuff on their own before they even show up for OTAs and training camp.
Right.
But the missing element is it's not psychobabble. It's not like,
Yeah.
It's not like seeing a clinician that's going to like label them as they're this type of person.
Yeah, right. Or you get this problem that
Yeah,
needs to
they
be
got this
solved.
problem, or you got to communicate in this way.
That's right. Yeah.
Their learning style is this. They're kinesthetic. They need walkthroughs. They need to do it on the field, whatever it is. No, what I see is the difference is that most organizations don't know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't have a clear identity. You're absolutely, or they think they do, they don't. Yeah.
They say they do,
right.
but you've got a guy in the president chair in the GM office that is maybe the first time he's had that job, and he's making 7 figures for the first time, and he's thinking about protecting his job.
That's right. Yeah. Scarcity mindset. He's trying to survive in advance. He's in survival mode. He's not, and trying to cope. He's not thriving. Right.
So sometimes you draft a quarterback in the first round because you need a quarterback because you think it's going to buy you 3 or 4 more years,
right.
when in fact you're not going to win.
That's right. Yeah.
So instead of like getting that guy that some other team threw him in the trash heap, that's actually better than the rookie who's never seen an NFL defense before, and improving your culture and the alignment between your culture and your players, and making sure that everybody in the organization's on the same page. Everybody's going down the river the same direction.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think knowing what you don't know about your identity, right? Like how to, because everybody talks about culture, but I think what I really like to get after it. I think I call culture is the organizational character, right? And my work in leader development, especially at the military academy, has dealt a lot with character development because our service academies, because we produce commissioned officers for service to the nation, character development is a big part of what we do, not just because of the law and warfare and the ethical piece, but like understanding right and wrong. And warfare is gray. It's not black or white. And your responsibility as officers is oftentimes you're kind of the judge, jury, and executioner with the soldiers that you're responsible for commanding and leading, right? So with all that being said, like I've done a lot of work in character development, I think, and when it all starts, and there's a lot of ingredients that go into that, but it all starts with core values, the foundation, right? It includes your beliefs, belief system, your purpose, and then that makes it those are the core elements of your identity. Now, there's other things that kind of go in that you just sprinkle in there, but if you want to talk about, like, if you're looking at the things that make up, oxygen or water, or what are the core elements, or make steel, those are the core elements that make identity. And I think when we throw out around the word character a lot, we throw around the word culture a lot, but we don't really know what that means, frankly. And so, or how to be able to assess, select, and develop it along those lines, right? And I lean heavily on the development side, but I work on all 3 ends of that spectrum: assessment, selection, and development. I don't deal with free agency a lot as well too. And so we have it's a lot of this educated guessing that's kind of going on. And so if you don't understand it, you're not aware of do you have identity or not. Let's be honest with yourselves, because individuals, sometimes we think that we're fully self-aware or we're not. And so we got to fill our blind spots in a lot of different ways. So another thing I think organizations end up becoming self-liquidating ice cream cones because there's a lot of emperors walking around who are naked, who think they're wearing beautiful robes, right? To use that old fable, and so they think we've got a culture, or we think we have an identity, I don't want to criticize them, but like, I think the Steelers are a great example of that, right? And so it's like, okay, is 10 win, I mean, bunch of 10 win season, is that good? Is that good enough? Is that the Steelers standard, right? But all you hear about is about how great that culture is. And I think that, I didn't know that culture at all, but like, I would make an argument, if that's good enough, then maybe your bar isn't set high enough, right? Now, does that mean that you completely blow things up? And, no, but we have to, there's a constant process of improvement, right? You can never be satisfied with that. And I think that's why those mantras of really great leaders in those organizations of the franchises who have had success in sports, business, all of the range of different arenas, they're never satisfied. Unfortunately, they're never satisfied. It's saving, but they're constantly trying to get better, and that's what drives them. And so as soon as you got to figure it out, then you resting on your laurels, you're setting yourself up to be defeated.
Well, I think here's the other thing. Most NFL head coaches that become a head coach for the first time are ill-equipped to do the job. And I'm not attacking them. I'd be in the same boat. Any of us would be in the same boat. If you haven't been the guy and now you're the guy, you have so many more responsibilities and pressures. Your focus and your time is being pulled lots of different directions. And your agent and your previous coaches demonstrated for you, and your agent's reminding you, make sure you have a culture.
Yeah.
Make sure you have a motto for the season. So every coach, whether it's Ben or any of the other guys, they come in and they go, hey, this is what it is. This is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Here's the issue, though. I don't know if the coaches know that they have to live it. They don't have to like it. They don't have to love it, but they got to live it. And their staff has to live it. And the organization has to live it. Because when you have a lack of integrity because not everybody's living it, the players don't do it. Because they don't listen to what is said. They look at what is done. And so when the coach is saying, hey, man, I need you to take care of your body and don't show up fat when you come back for OTAs this offseason, really be focused, and the coach weighs 350 pounds, ain't going to work.
Sure. Yeah. You got to walk the talk.
Hey,
that's integrity. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Or you're about loyalty and you know the coach is cheating on his wife and he's telling everybody, hey, man, be loyal to our organization. Buy in. Well, he's not even buying into his life.
Yeah. So why should I listen to him? Yeah.
Yeah. So integrity is very, very important because these players are not stupid. They're very smart and they really, they do some deep dives. Yeah. They want to know who's telling them to run through the wall. They're not like, it's not like 30, 40 years ago. They just do it.
Yeah. And do it without asking why. Yeah. Understanding the why and then having the model, the behavior being modeled and be very consistent, it's a necessity. It's critical, right? It's not essential. It's not enhancing. It's critical, and I agree with you. Right. And I think that's when, going back to the whole thing, why coaches aren't prepared. I think it's systemic to, coaching in general. Right. And I was really lucky when I retired as part of my internship to work at the Texas A&M Coaching Academy. Because part of my process when I transitioned, I was like, okay, well, figure out who am I? Looking at my own identity. And I realized that, hey, I'm a coach. Like, what does that look like? So I'm not a coach in the true athletic sense, but I have spent a lot of time coaching, what does that look like? And, and then I was thinking about like what I want to do when I grew up. Did I want to be an athletic director? Did I want to be, maybe I want to be, I know I didn't want to be necessarily a football coach, but do I want to pursue this mental performance thing? What does that look like? It was really interesting. They support coaches all across the state of Texas. We started the veterans coaching program because there's a coaching shortages everywhere. There's more coaches that are retiring than are being replenished. So you have a shortage of coaches. Coaches play a huge role in, especially in underprivileged areas, underserved areas where their kids come from broken homes. They're often father, mother figures. They're key mentors. They spend a lot of time with players. I mean, you and I know, you're an athlete and so was I, which has made a big difference in my life. And serving coaches is now a part of my mission. But one thing that's interesting I notice is even at the middle school, high school level, you have to be certified to be a teacher. You don't have to be certified to be a coach. Think about that for a minute. There's no certification. There's no training or education required to be a coach, right? The reason why coaches become coaches is because they played the game themselves and they knew someone and they got an opportunity, right? And then everything other than that has been OJT. And you think that pattern continues to the professional level. It blows my mind. As a guy who had to be certified to do what I do. And I had to be trained and certified at every level when I was leading soldiers for 25 years. It is almost like, it shocked me to be able to learn that, how important they were in the development of young people and how much they get paid, yet they have so little training and education, right? And
well, here's something I'd like to add to that. I'm a very positive person and I see the best in people, but this is somewhat of a negative comment. Coaches have so much influence, both positively and negatively.
They do, yeah.
And so we remember our coaches more than we remember our teachers. And you remember the coaches, the best ones and the worst ones. You don't remember the ones in the middle.
Yeah.
And hopefully when you have a bad coach and he doesn't believe in you, or he doesn't give you a fair opportunity, and all those types of things that happen in sports, that you turn that into fuel. You turn that failure into fuel, okay, and motivation, because that you can't let your coach have power. So I talk a lot about reclaiming your power. So as a man, as a young man or a young woman, if your coach is not like in your corner and is not treating you like the way you think you should be treated, you can't give that coach your power.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. And unfortunately, I've learned this, you probably learn more from the negative experiences than you do the positive ones, because that negativity bias, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And again, I was really blessed. I never had a bad boss in 20 years in the military. And I will tell you, it's a big reason why I stayed, right? I never came into the military thinking that I was going to be a lifer. It was never part of the plan. And I kept my options open all the way, probably till my last assignment, right? Or it didn't make any sense not to go continue a couple of years, 2 more years till I retired. But I had that, had I had a really bad experience early on, I don't know if I did that. And there are a lot of great talented officers that I went to West Point with that left because they had bad experience, because of bad leaders. The expectations that they had that were not met by the people who are now leading them. And so I think it's a really important point that you're making, but what if we actually train and educated coaches, right? What if they, and I think technology allows us to be able to do that. And I think there's a potential for us to be able to, I've seen paradigm shifting a little bit. Like, we don't have a leader development program for coaches in the NFL. I think there's some interest there. I think we can use micro learning. Like, the corporate model of executive coaching and leadership does not work. But I think that we can get creative to work within the tyranny of time. There's an interest and a need to help develop coaches, because they do play such a crucial role at all levels of sport, right? But especially early on in the development of our young people. It wasn't something the coaching academy has been able to overcome that. There are some institutions that are out there who are doing that on the educational side, not on the training side. But for me, it was something I'm really passionate about. So if you were to ask me, would I rather work with a player or a coach? I probably would work with a coach. And the reason why is because there's a multiplicative effect associated with, because if I could train a coach, the coach is going to have it becomes a multiplying factor, right? And so he's going to be able to have such more of an effect on the player than I am directly, right? I'm a limited asset, right? But when I can access these nodes of influence, I can now exponentially improve the effects of mental training. And I mean, let's face it, coaches aren't psychologists, whether you like it or not. All leaders are, right? And so when they could start to take these things and use their own language, and I encourage them all the time. I love it. Use your own language. Make this your own. Whatever you're saying that works, hey, go and run with it. If you want to know whether or not it's theoretically based or something like that, I'll tell you, I'll ask you if you want to know. But if it's working, keep doing it. And so, but I think a lot of times even coaches remove their own power base, especially now at the elite levels of college, because they have so many other resources around them. And so they reduce themselves to just be X's and O's, when their main job is Jimmy's and Joe's. And I think that I want to give the power back to coaches and focus more on Jimmy's and Joe's, less on X's and O's.
I can tell you right now, if we had a situation where we coached a team and said you can only have 20 plays, but we also coached their minds.
Yeah.
And we could use different motions and different formations to disguise the plays. That's all we need.
Yeah.
So what coaches get tricked into believing is that I've got to outsmart and outwork the other coaching staff.
Yeah.
On any given Sunday in the NFL, the team that can have the most players on the field playing near their potential is generally the team's going to win. Because everybody's got talented players. Yeah, there's a few superstars that are just one of ones. But for the most part, they're all pros. The 20th best quarterback in QBR is he's still a good player.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can he show up and play? And I call it greatness, is when you meet your potential.
Yeah.
And everybody's got different levels of greatness.
Yeah.
Everybody's got different levels of potential. But it's like, if I'm the owner, I want my coaching staff to get my players to play at their potential. And if it's not good enough, hey, you know what? When we get a chance, we'll just upgrade our players when we can. But what's absolutely demoralizing for fans is when you know your team's got more than that.
Yeah. And they're not playing after that potential, right?
I mean, they're going through the motions, baby.
Yeah. And they can tell that too. And I think when you see people quit, or throw in the towel, right? And the fans know, especially in fan bases that are smart football fan bases. And I think it's a great point, right? But if they're squeezing every bit of, I call it the orange effect, right? That's orange's optimal performance. If you're squeezing every bit of juice out of what you got at every position in the roster that's on the field, I mean, and you don't get the result, is you can, not that it's okay, but you can live with it, right? You can live with it because you can get certain parts. Once you establish that culture, for use of an overused term, now you can get the talent that you bring in that can match. There's a missing puzzle piece that can come in that can really be a game changer, right? Because now they're falling into this collective mindset that we're gonna get optimal performance out of every snap, every single opportunity that we get here on the field. And I think there's some great examples of that are out there, and I think the time of the season that's really interesting to see when that happens, and the individual players and the teams that do that is really when they're numerically eliminated. I'm always fascinated to see that time of season, right? You're numerically eliminated and you have a lamed up coach or staff or GM or something like that too. You don't have a lot to play for. And I want to, how are those players playing individually and collectively? Like, how are they showing up? How are they mustering everything that they got to be able to perform in those moments? And it was interesting for me to see that kind of play out, like the different motives that go into that, right? Like things that I hadn't seen before inside a locker room that really stood out to me as motivational factors that could drive players to do things to still squeeze every bit of juice out of what they got. But I think you made a great point about what you're looking at and how important it is to evaluate effort. It is measurable. You can evaluate it. When you see it. I think great teams do that.
And the best players that make the most are the ones that are the leaders and set the example.
That's right.
And the guys that are trying to get paid, they always have great effort. But it's the guy that doesn't have to perform. He's still going to make over $1 million a game, and he's not going to get waived. He's not going to get terminated.
Right.
How does that guy show up? Because he sets the tone for everybody else.
That's right. Yeah, he sets the standard. Yeah, and is he an enforcer? Is he helping self-police what that standard is? Because there's another misconception is that I'm seeing. I lead by example, and I don't, which is a cop out tonight. I don't mean I don't have to communicate. There hasn't been anywhere on the introversion extroversion. Pick any great leader in history as a series of case studies. They have always been able to communicate, right? Either so they say a lot or they say a little. They still communicate, right? And so the idea that I only have to lead by example is the biggest bullshit. Sorry, excuse me. I hear it all the time because I'm tired of it, especially this time of year. It is the most bullshit red flag thing I've ever heard in my life too. And never ever has there been a leader that's worth a damn who's ever not communicated and had the ability to hold someone accountable for not doing the right thing the right way. Never happened.
Well, there's something about when you perform and you communicate that gives you more power and authority and credibility and authenticity and all those words that describe, like, hey guys, I am doing what I'm saying.
Right.
And then you got two fraudulent people. The one that say it but don't do it.
Right. But
the other fraudulent people, I would call it like nonfeasance in legal terms. It's like you could have saved the girl from running out on the street and get hit by the car, but you didn't do it, and you think you're good.
Yeah, you're so
bro. All you had to do, she was 6 years old. All you had to do was reach out and stop her, and you could have. So it's when you should have done something.
Yeah. You're still enabling. Yeah, even though as a bystander. Yeah.
So when you lead by example only, to me that's nonfeasance. That's an example of nonfeasance, because people are going to listen to you because you're doing it, and you're not speaking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, not speaking out there is, it's still an action. Not doing anything is still doing something. You're absolutely right.
Hey, Andy, we could go all day, brother. I know you got a schedule. I got a schedule. I want to thank you for being on Pro Mindset today. Where can people find you that want somebody that's got sports and military mindset experience, and you've got the credibility of working with the NFL people?
Yeah.
You're a keynote speaker. You do a lot of things. How can they find you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'll drop a link to my link tree that has all my contact information out there. Reach out to me on social media. My Kung Fu is the strongest on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, be able to check that out. I'm pretty active. I post articles, post a couple times a week. You follow me on Instagram at Design to Perform. It's DESIGN TOPERFORM. Easy to find that as well too. But the big thing, if you're interested in a keynote speaker, my keynote speech is called Rise Up, Fighting to Win the War from Within. And really, you're going to learn about what mental fitness is, what it's not, why it's important to your organization. Learn about a learning process called the check-in that help improve your individual leaders and your organizational self-awareness, and help improve your empathy and compassion, and help meet people where they're at to get there where they need to go. And so that's something that I'm pushing right now. I'm available right now to be able to do speaking for your next event, whether it's a conference or it's a professional development session. I'm for hire. You can reach out to me, book a free consult on my website, which is designedtoperform.org. And I love to serve and support your team, because we're all designed to perform. And if we can learn the art and science of kicking butt between the ears, we can be at our best when it matters the most.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a pro mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.